Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our webcast, Reopening, 3 Things to Know About Cleaning Equipment. This is Rachel Lego from TTI Floor Care, and I'm going to be the moderator today. I am pleased to introduce the leading industry expert as our presenter today, Dave Frank. Dave is the president of the American Institute for Cleaning Sciences, AICS, an independent third-party accreditation organization that establishes standards to improve the professional performance of the cleaning industry. Dave is the authority in the commercial cleaning industry, serving facility service providers, distributors, buying groups, associations, and manufacturers. Thank you for joining us for the presentation today, Dave. Before we start, I do want to let everybody know that today's event will be after today's event, there's going to be a live question and answer session. To submit your questions, please type them into the Q&A panel. To access the Q&A panel, navigate to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click the Q&A button. Dave will be answering as many questions as time permits, and you will also receive a PDF copy of today's presentation slides within the next several days. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And for some of you, it's afternoon, so good afternoon. We're going to be talking about 2 primary areas, and the cleaning industry has gone through some very significant changes in the last 3 months. And so without a vaccine to the current health crisis, cleaning is now front and center. And we identified a few things talking to industry leaders about what was happening, and what we identified mostly is that we're now doing infection prevention level cleaning, which is hospital grade cleaning. And when we looked at 90% of the industry, 90% of the industry cleaned for appearance and maybe didn't have the technical knowledge on how hospitals were cleaned and what those protocols, standard operating procedures, and best practices were. The second part of the topic is how to open buildings and how to make sure that we keep them open. And so regardless of the type of building that you're in, whether it's a school, a university, a manufacturing facility, a Class A building, these principles apply. And so in launching an online learning management system that identified these areas, we also wanted to make sure that we verified those best practices and those SOPs based on standards. And I'll cover where those standards are and why those standards are important. The global pandemic not only changed the business, but it changed the protocols, and the knowledge tree had to be reestablished. And so people are asking lots of questions about how to perform certain things, what's going to be the cost, what's the right type of equipment. And we were working with some schools yesterday, and obviously there's a host of different questions that people will ask. What we're primarily looking to do and accomplish is to get the right type of outcome. And so we're looking for clean, safe, healthy buildings at the right price or the right cost. The current issue is that a lot of facilities, like the ones that you're working in, now have fiscal restraints. And so we have to have a comprehension of timestamps, whether it's hours or production rates. We have to look for mechanization. We have to understand task lists, and we have to understand how we can back into these numbers and do it reasonably within the budgets. I've talked with a lot of government, state agencies, school districts, universities. Everybody has this fiscal restraint. And so you've got to understand the individual silos as to how we can have, or at least begin, the conversation. And then we have to look at the area types in buildings, and this all is embedded within the SIM standard, so we can use those principles as part of that actual conversation. At the bottom, we have NASCAR, and all the property management firms have put out a document on building reopening, and each and every one of them tells us that we need to clean more or that we need to clean differently. The thing that these reopening documents don't do is it doesn't tell you how. And I see a lot of things on LinkedIn, and I see a lot of companies promoting different things, and I see some people from outside of our industry that want to come into our industry, and they don't know the regulations, They don't know the protocols. They don't know the safety requirements or even how to read an SDS sheet. And so for all industry stakeholders, we have to focus on the reopening process, which is really a series of documents to stimulate a conversation about how these buildings will be reopened and what the protocols will be. And upper management has to be involved. It's going to be more than just telling custodians to clean more. We have to have a structure, and with the restraints on the budgets or the hours, we can't frustrate our workers, and this time has brought out a lot of emotional stress for a lot of people personally and professionally, and that's why we have to have a collaborative dialogue with all stakeholders within the building. Again, we're looking for a clean, safe, healthy facility at the right cost. This is the workplace readiness platform, and I'm not going to go into great detail onto each one of these, but I'll say that these are the things that are in consideration, and one of them is to prepare the building. So what are the protocols? What are the policies? Who is involved? Do we have everything that we need to prepare the building? Do we have the communication that we need? Do we have entrance areas identified? This is not an easy thing to do, and it's going to require the participation of the custodial department or the EVS department. And it's also going to require maybe HR to be involved and also upper management to prepare these buildings to be reopened. And some of the protocols are more than just cleaning. The second one is to prepare the workforce. How did we communicate with the workforce? Did we train them? Do they understand the protocols? How many people are we allowing in an elevator? Do we have the signage throughout the building that might say only 2 people are allowed in the break room? Are we wearing masks? Are we not wearing masks? Are we wearing masks in the common areas of the building? And then maybe are we allowed to not have masks at our workstations? Are we able to talk about collaborative cleaning to get students to make less messes? And are we able to reallocate low-risk tasks to high-risk tasks or infection prevention level tasks? And I'll give you some ideas on how to reallocate labor. Controlling access to the building is identifying, do we have visitor screening forms? Are we taking people's temperature? Who's allowed in the building? Who's not allowed in the building? And what are the protocols? Because allowing anyone in the building certainly can create a situation where you could have an outbreak if we don't know who that person is, if they're asymptomatic, and who is it that they're coming in contact with. Social distancing policies. Everybody is now at that 6-foot range. That's because of viral dispersion. When I look at the social distancing, some people get it, some people don't, but I think we've all been trained on that over the last 90 days, and everybody is practicing social distancing. I see some people wearing masks in Home Depot and grocery stores, and I also see some people that don't. But what is the capacity of the individual space, whether it's a conference room, a classroom, a cafeteria? Do we have directions, and are we posting signage within the building to remind people of social distancing and also to remind them what is the maximum amount of people that can be or students that can be in that room? The cleaning protocols have caused a lot of confusion, and so standard operating procedures are critical. Reading SDS sheets are critical. Understanding safety and exposure are also important. And so when I look at some of the things that are occurring, you have to have the technical knowledge of how we clean and how we clean properly. And there's no shortcuts. There's no substitution for proper cleaning. We have to read the SDS sheets. We have to understand the labels. We have to understand what the safety requirements will be. And I think that it's important to identify the area types, any vulnerable population in the buildings, and to make sure that we institute the right types of policies. And again, this requires collaboration. And last but not least is the communication piece. And this is something that's communication to visitors and occupants and students, people that are coming into the facility, people who are traveling, that may be working in a Class A office building. But workplace readiness requires a comprehensive list for conversation to establish those policies within your buildings. All that we're talking about is verified by standards. When we published these standards, the standards were assembled by 3 committees. They went through a comment period, and then they went through peer review. That's how standards are developed. A lot of people use the word standards, they use the word protocols. These standards are non-prescriptive. They talk about quality systems, service delivery. There's an HR piece that's related to the people that work in your departments. There's health, safety, environment, management commitment, and then sustainable buildings and green cleaning services. When people ask and they say, well, how do we verify that best practice? We verify the best practice by looking at the standard and what did the standard call for. And so this is an important document because many of you may be called into a meeting with upper management, and it's better to say, here's the standard, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, these are the government regulations, these are the safety requirements, and these are the systems that we're setting up, and this is why. And so validation is becoming increasingly important at that upper management level. So when we look at equipment, we look at what is the hours or what is the production rate, and the challenge that people are having right now is that we've got budget cuts and there's restraints. And some government agencies may have received some emergency money, and that emergency money certainly can be useful. I know that there's some legislation that's been floating around where people are looking at getting money for additional cleaning. But for the time being, we need to work with what we have. And so the question is do we have the right equipment? Is the equipment productive? And what is that production rate, and can we reallocate labor? If we're deploying touch point cleaning, we're going to need additional hours to perform those tasks. If we're doing infection prevention level cleaning, we're going to need hours to make sure that our closets are clean and organized and that our equipment is clean and well maintained. And so what we look at is we're going to look at what those hours are, and we refer to that as the reallocation of task, time, and looking at what the hours are. If I ask most people what their production rates are, they probably don't know. But if I ask them how many hours does it take you to vacuum or do restrooms or to do trash, they can usually tell me what their hours are. When we talk about particulate containment, I'm seeing property managers doing a variety of different things. I've seen some people that are removing hand dryers from buildings. I'm seeing people moving from external bag vacuums to HEPA vacuums, because now everything is about particulate containment. And so we'll talk a little bit about why that containment's important. I'm looking at the safety of students, the safety of teachers, the safety of building occupants, and importantly is the safety of frontline workers that are performing these best practices in cleaning. The customer's perception is becoming the reality. What is the customer's experience related to how you opened the building? How are we going to keep it open? And what are these new cleaning protocols going to look like? Having a dirty bucket of water with a dirty mop sitting at the entranceway of a building is not a good optic. Having custodial closets that are dirty and disorganized is not a good optic. Having equipment that's not maintained is not a good optic. And so when you talk about infection prevention level protocols, we're talking about what you would see when you're in a hospital or potentially a long-term care facility. So the labor savings piece, the right equipment can give us the things that we need for saving labor. Our industry spends a lot of money on innovation, mechanization, whether it's battery vacuums, auto scrubbers, robotic auto scrubbers, or we may have to actually look at the scope of work and be able to stagger it. I want to talk a little bit about how the virus is transferred. There's a lot of media sensation around this. We've read all the white papers, and I'm going to make it as simple as possible. Coughing, sneezing, talking, laughing is what we call droplet dispersion. That is the purpose of, one, wearing masks, and 2, social distancing. And so all viruses are transferred that way. When you look at this person-to-person contact, a virus can be transferred that way, which is why we have hand washing protocols, hand sanitizer. Most people aren't shaking hands, people aren't hugging, people aren't getting close because there's person-to-person transmission. And the third is that the virus lives on an inanimate object for several days. And so I don't think that anybody on this call is touching anything. Most people I see are using a shirt sleeve. Some people are wearing gloves when they go into retail applications. But the highly touched object piece is the piece that we're having to figure out how many hours does it take to perform that task. And we're trying to figure out what is the protocol for cleaning those specific tasks. There's a workloading manual. Some of you on this call have performed workloading before, and there are steps for workloading. We have to understand the inventory of the building. We have to understand what tasks we're performing. We have to understand the frequency of each task, what the time is for that task, and then be able to calculate the hours. Now, workloading has been around for over 30 years, and there's a lot of different software programs that are available. But if you're looking for a guidebook on workloading, one exists and it goes into great detail. That's another course that we have within the OBC program where you can take the course and look at how you come to that number. The easiest thing to do is shorthand workloading, and in the current environment, because everybody's pretty busy doing either decontamination level cleaning or summer cleanup or different types of changing their protocols, you may want to look at the hour piece of it. And so we can certainly talk about productivity factors, and I'll show a slide that does, but there is a guidebook, there is software available on the market, and there are ways to calculate the total cost of cleaning. All area types are not created equal. All buildings are not created equal because it depends on the density. And so what we do is we look at the area types, we divide it by risk, high risk, medium risk, low risk. A high risk area type would be the entranceway or the back dock of a building where potentially I could have people entering that building that haven't been screened. A medium risk area would be a conference room, which you see in the middle of this image, and that would be where I'm bringing in people from within the office that have already been screened. What is the social distancing? How many people are in that room? When they leave the room, is there someone's communicating that the table needs to be sanitized, disinfected? The arms of the chairs have to be sanitized, disinfected. What is the protocol for that medium risk area? Somebody's office or cubicle is a low risk area. And I'm encouraging people to look at collaborative cleaning so that they can do more hour reallocation where people are cleaning their own workstations and potentially could be dumping their own trash into a centralized area and their recycling. And so how you set this up is going to be up to you, but it does require a conversation about how we're going to do it, what are the area types, what are the levels of risk, and do we have a vulnerable population where it might be children with asthma or a worker that may have a pre-existing condition? Who have we identified in the building? And then which workers may be still working from home, and which workers do we need to have in the office? Sorry, we're getting a little bit of lag time on the screen, so I apologize. I'm going to need to go back. Okay, here we go. This is an example of a task list. You see the area types of general offices, restrooms, stairwells. Each individual area type has a list of tasks, and each task has a frequency. When we go to reallocate labor, we may want to look at the task, how much time, and what is the frequency? What is the risk of the task? If I say that entrance areas, restrooms, break rooms, cafeterias are high-risk areas, then those are areas that we may not be able to negotiate. If we say that vacuuming potentially would be a low-risk activity, maybe we're going to have to deploy cordless uprights, cordless backpack vacuums, and maybe we're going to vacuum 3 times a week instead of 5 times a week. There's a lot of different ways to configure it, but having the documentation is most important so that you can have a roadmap for what you're doing, how often you're doing it, and then how are we going to reallocate that labor. These are the areas where I see the most amount of labor savings, and these represent, when we workload buildings, 80% of the workload falls into several categories: trash, vacuum, restroom, and all buildings are different, usually represents about 75 to 85% of the total labor that we use in cleaning a building. And so mechanization is how we reallocate labor. Mechanization is a term that comes out of the agriculture industry. It's been around for a while. Our industry is very mechanized. And so the mechanization is how do we gather additional hours? Can we get larger auto scrubbers, robotic auto scrubbers? Are we replacing buckets and wringers with micro scrubbers? And then cordless vacuums give me an incredible amount of productivity when I look at that as an innovation within the industry. We've been building workloading software and spreadsheets that look similar to this for over 25 years. We take the square footage of the building, we give it a labor rate and benefits as an average, and this is really for illustrative purposes. When we were doing this for a group of schools yesterday, the cleaning days per year is 190 days as an average. On this one, I put in 260, which would be like a Class A office building. The practical production rate for a corded backpack is 15,000 square feet per hour. When we say practical production rate, that's in your buildings with your people, your obstacles, and that's an average. That could be a combination of obstructed and unobstructed area types. In the time studies that have been performed on cordless backpack vacuums and upright vacuums, the average production rate is about 30 to 40,000 square feet per hour. Once we untether the cable and the plugging and unplugging in of the cable and cable management, what we see is we see a production rate that virtually doubles. Now, in some instances, and I took the conservative number of 30,000, it could be as high as 40,000 depending on the area. And this is what we refer to as traffic vacuuming. Traffic vacuuming, again, is a tribal practice. That is how custodians actually vacuum in the field. So we look at the costs, we look at the hours, we come up with an annual labor number. And we're not looking to reduce, but we're looking to reallocate. In this specific example, we're able to save, and I know that this 500,000 square foot building may be larger than some of yours, but we're looking to how we can accumulate the hours. And so when you look at this area right here, you're looking at over 16 hours per day that we can reallocate for infection prevention level cleaning, focusing on keeping our equipment clean, focusing on highly touched objects. And this way, this becomes cost neutral. So I'm not adding hours to the cleaning operation, I'm reallocating those hours. And that's one of the most important techniques that you can do as you look at changing your protocols as your buildings begin to reopen. I need to find the hours. Now I can also find hours by reducing the frequencies of tasks, or I can find hours by asking students in a school to pick up the trash at the end of the day. I can also find hours within the operation by looking and defining high and low risk areas, or performing the cleaning system where I'm going to do collaborative cleaning versus doing zone cleaning or some type of traditional cleaning method. And so this is just one example. You can do this with other types of equipment like a robot auto scrubber, or moving from a 20-inch single disc scrubber to a wider 32-inch scrubber depending on your building's footprint. Of course, you have to have the capital expenditures to be able to make the investments, and some of you may have that. Obviously, if you don't, then you may have to look at how you're going to change the scope of work or the frequencies within your operation. Particulate containment, or what I always refer to as indoor air quality, that topic has been around for a while and people may connect it to cleaning for health. I'm mostly concerned about the exposure of the frontline worker. What I see is I see this. And obviously, very few people cut open bags to take a look at them. But whether it's a shaker bag or whether it's a dirt cup, this is putting particulate in respirable space for the worker. And what we recommend is reevaluating the types of bags that you're using, whether it's a backpack vacuum or an upright. And so traditionally within our business, we define these as a shaker bag. And a lot of people will use a shaker bag and a backpack vacuum, and the custodian will shake out that bag, or they'll beat the bag on the side of the dumpster, whatever that might look like. That is not a good best practice in today's environment. And so our recommendation when it comes to best practice is obviously HEPA bags, and we're looking for a closed HEPA filter bag. Some of the upright vacuums actually have a tab on them where you can pull those tabs across, and it actually closes it before they take the bag. Some people may take those bags and put them into a trash can liner and then tie off the top of the liner so that you don't have contaminants being put into respirable space. And so this is how protocols change. This is how products change when you're looking at infection prevention or hospital-grade cleaning for your buildings. The perception. There's too much social media. There's too many people posting things. People are taking pictures. They're taking pictures of buckets and wringers and janitors' closets and vacuums. And so the optics of the commercial cleaning industry should change. And this can happen within an existing budget. I don't think you have to have brand new everything, but I do think that we have to focus on clean cleaning equipment. I look at carts, I look at machines, I look at all of it, and I believe that that's important. And so originally the commercial cleaning industry focused on 3 of these 5. We always focused on the people, the product, and the process. Now what we have to do is focus on the production rate and the reallocation of tasks and performing the risk assessments of the facility. And we're going to have to focus on the perception that people have. And I've been in a lot of buildings. Many of you are in a lot of buildings, and I'm not telling you how to clean or what to do. What I am telling you is that if you open your building incorrectly, and if you don't change the protocols, and there's an outbreak in a school or in the building, that's when it's going to get ugly. And that's when people are going to get upset and they're going to say, well, I thought we were doing this, 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 and that. And then I hear custodians say, well, we don't have time for all of that. This is why we have to have a plan, and we have to over-communicate with people, and we have to have documentation, and we have to understand what we're going to be doing moving forward, because if we don't, and then something occurs because of something that we didn't do or we said we didn't have time for, then all of a sudden we're going to have administrators, parents, teachers, people within the community, and I guarantee you the local news will be at your building. There'll be yellow tape around it. The Board of Health will be there, and you'll be having camera drones flying over your school or your Class A office building, and that's not where you want to be. And so it's important to at least begin with the discussions, take a look at existing hours, and find opportunities not only for reallocation, but ways to deploy best practices and to have written SOPs and to focus on the safety of workers, occupants, and children within buildings. Our industry has different perceptions, and the perception right now from the consumer is I need to have a level of confidence. I need to know that the custodial department has been trained, that we're communicating properly, and that we're not just spreading around dirt and cleaning for appearance. We're now cleaning the invisible, which is what we do in hospitals. And cleaning the invisible is very different from cleaning and saying, oh, that looks clean. And so viral dispersion can happen in a lot of ways. Highly touched objects can be identified. Area types can be prioritized. We can look at the occupants of the buildings, and we can perform a risk assessment of vulnerable populations because we have children with asthma in schools, and we may have a vulnerable population within our building, depending on what that individual may have, whether it was a organ transplant or whether they have COPD or whatever it might be. But now we move from non-technical to technical, and we move to this infection prevention level, and I think that it's important to have the right information, the right equipment, and the right dialogue with you, your staff, and with the administration. And it's going to require a collaborative effort to discuss how we're going to do this, what are we going to do it with, how are we going to reorganize and reprioritize. And so it's a very changed time. There is no vaccine, so we're all going to have to live with this until that happens. And until that happens, cleaning is going to be front and center, and your departments are going to be more important than ever. And the way that you communicate what you do, how you do it, who you're doing it with is also going to be increasingly important. And I know that this is easy for me to say, and it's more difficult for you to do, but we don't really have a choice. And when I look at it, somebody said, well, the janitor's not going to follow that procedure. I said they don't have a choice. They have to understand why it's critical that they follow that standard operating procedure and focus on that best practice. Okay, we always try to start on time and we try to end on time. So we started at 9. It is now 9:30. I'm in Colorado, Rocky Mountain time. We have some resources here, some websites that you can click through. There is information on outcome-based cleaning. You can access our website. There's also some free information there if you need that. There's a workloading guidebook. There's a copy of the Cleaning Industry Management Standard and other resources. There is also a time and motion study, and that time and motion study gives you the protocol for how the time study was conducted. Remember, we're focusing on practical times, which is your people in your buildings with the obstacles and the things that you experience versus like a published time. And there's also ebooks on the Hoover commercial website as well. And so there's lots of information and resources. I know a lot of people have been reading. We're also family, and we're here to help. If there's anything that we can, questions that we could answer, please post those questions. I'm now going to ask Rachel. Rachel, are you there?
I am, Dave. Thank you so much for the great presentation, and we do have a couple of questions. I think one ties to something you just brought up. The question came in from participant, ISSA 612 cleaning times are nowhere near your vacuuming numbers. How did you get there?
Well, the two numbers that you saw in the sheet that we discussed, and those numbers were practical rates. So when I talk to a contract cleaner, the published rate, and there's a difference between, let me give you the three rates. There's published rates, there's theoretical rates, and there's practical cleaning times. The most important time is a practical cleaning time. The practical cleaning time accounts for real-world conditions with a consistent set of variables that can be defined by managers and supervisors within the building. That might be setup time, travel time, and actual time of vacuuming, and then what are the obstacles, what is the type of building, what type of carpet are we cleaning. There's a lot of variables that are involved. And so the 15,000 square feet is a practical cleaning time. The book time is 7,400, which we classify as a published time. The difference between a practical time and a published time is the practical time was with real custodians in real buildings with the equipment. We videotape that, and we also establish a protocol within that particular area of a commercial building. A theoretical time is an engineer's time, and this is a mathematical formulation calculated on the width of the machine like an auto scrubber, the forward walking pace of a worker. The average walking speed of the cleaning worker might be 1 or 2 miles per hour. This number is then multiplied by 50 to 80, which is the feet in a mile, and then divided by, let's say, 12 inches. this gives us a theoretical time. So when you look at the leading auto scrubber companies within the industry, they'll have a production rate on their brochure. It's more than likely that that is a theoretical production rate based on a mathematical formula that that engineer used. And so again, in review, you have three kinds of production rates. You have published rates, which may have been repurposed for the last 20 years. And if I ask somebody for the protocol or the time study, they may not be able to produce it for me. I have a theoretical rate, which is an engineering formula on forward speed and width. And the third one is I have practical cleaning times, which is an actual time study that will videotape and a protocol that we establish that can be replicated by any manufacturer.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Another question that came in, how many days does the virus live? Define several days, please.
Well, we have the scientific papers, and the coronavirus can live on an inanimate object for up to 9 days. I saw some articles that some of the cruise ships that were contaminated, that it actually lived within a room for over 17 days. We have a list of viruses and how long they live on inanimate objects that's produced by some scientific organizations. What we know is that it can, let's just take it at 9 days. It can live on a surface for a fairly long period of time. There are some people that were concerned on, how long does it live on a box from Amazon, or how long does it live on a plastic surface. I think the key thing is to identify your area types by risk, to identify the highly touched objects within those area types, and then to have a standard operating procedure as to how we're going to clean those highly touched objects. Now, normally, a highly touched object, the minute that someone touches it, it naturally becomes contaminated. We have several school districts, universities, some of the large property management companies are looking at antimicrobial tape for some of these highly touched objects to give the occupants of the building an optic that gives them an assurance that's in place. We were talking with a large school district, and they were concerned about the pencil sharpeners. And I said, well, we have two options. We can remove them, and we can put in electric pencil sharpeners, or you guys can buy antimicrobial tape that has silver impregnated in it. And I said, and you can wrap the pencil sharpener handles in that tape. I said, so we have options, but these are unusual conversations. But I think that's a good question to ask, and I think that that's a good conversation.
Great. I think we've got time for just one more question. We have a participant who wanted to learn about ESS units and the products, aside from Clorox 360, that customers are using. So the chemical companies are hesitating recommending their products due to the EPA, also regarding misters and foggers. Do you have any information that you can share with our participants regarding this topic?
This is a regulatory topic, and so EPA is the governing body for our industry. And let me say it simply that the law is the label, and the label is the law. There are no shortcuts to proper cleaning, and I think that spraying an antimicrobial pesticide in a classroom or in an office building is fraught with danger. And doing it, you're taking a decontamination procedure for crime scene cleanup, and you're trying to turn it into a daily cleaning procedure. And I see all of the LinkedIn posts where someone's spraying a stadium with a drone. They're violating the label. We're supposed to clean first to get organic substances off the surface and disinfect second. And so many of the manufacturers have letters and disclaimers because they're concerned about students and teachers and occupants of the building ingesting an antimicrobial pesticide. All disinfectants and sanitizers are classified by EPA as pesticides. And somebody was asking me this question yesterday, and I said, well, if spraying the interior of a building with a pesticide was an accepted best practice, I said, how come hospitals don't use it? And this guy said, well, that's a good point. I said, look, we can't even have a pack of peanuts in a classroom with students, and we want to spray down. It's not effective. And I'll give you an example. Spraying down a classroom with a pesticide before cleaning those desktops is a violation of the label. And this is where technical cleaning came into place, or infection prevention level techniques came into place. I'm not looking to, I can't stop what's going on, but I do know that EPA is very aware of what's going on. The top manufacturers are very aware of what's going on, and a lot of people are concerned about people respirating disinfectants and pesticides, and they're very concerned about the residues that we're leaving on surfaces that could potentially burn the back of someone's legs on a shopping cart or on a toilet seat. And so it's not my opinion, it's the regulation component of it, and we primarily focus on the law and what is the regulation, and then the best practice is defined by EPA as it relates to the chemicals and the chemical manufacturers. So that's primarily our take on it. We report the news, we don't invent it. We don't believe that it's a good daily best practice to do that. We believe that proper cleaning is a much better best practice, and defining the right tools and the right types of chemicals, and it should be safe, it should be fast, and it should be effective.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for taking the time and wonderful presentation. I want to thank all of our attendees as well. And as stated at the beginning, we will be following up with a PDF of this presentation in the next several days. Appreciate you spending time with us today, and everybody take care.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.